In the Sculptors Palace, where clay is shaped into human fate, Khalid finds himself standing at the edge of an unfamiliar nightmare. What should have been a place of art becomes a silent arena of judgment, where every breath feels measured and every second draws him closer to an uncertain end. Between watching hands that mold his likeness and a city preparing its spectacle, the line between life and death begins to blur in Zikola. The poor stepped forward toward the two physicians one after another. From a distance, Khalid watched everything they did. He observed them carefully as they examined people in the same way Asl used to pinch a fold of skin to determine how many intelligence units a person possessed. He watched as one of the physicians took notes on a sheet of paper after examining each individual, as though recording observations about them. His heart pounded heavily. He glanced at the skin on his arms, comparing its paleness to that of the others around him. Then he lifted his eyes to the sky and silently prayed that God would spare him from this grant. A soldier suddenly ordered him to step forward. The moment he approached the physicians, one of them asked, "Are you ill?" "No," Khalid replied. One physician pinched a fold of skin on his arm, while the other examined another section between his fingers. They studied him for a few moments before ordering him to return to his place. Khalid stepped back just as Jawad approached. Jawad greeted him with a smile. The physicians continued their work while anxiety spread across the faces of many poor men and women. At last, they stood up again, reviewed their notes, and discussed their findings with the captain of the guards. The captain then turned toward the gathered men and women. "The physicians have informed us which among you are the poorest." He paused before continuing. "Whoever is spared today must work hard enough never to return here again. As for those chosen by the physicians, we will take them to the central district tomorrow, so they may be examined by the ruler's physician the day after. Let us hope she finds someone poorer than they are." He looked over the crowd once more. Khalid held his breath as the captain pointed at Jawad. You will come with me to the central district." Then he pointed at Khalid. "And you as well. The rest of you may return to your homes and celebrate the ruler's newborn child with your friends." Khalid dropped to his knees. "Me?" "Yes," the captain answered. "You two are the poorest people here. Now get up. You still have 2 chances left to survive." Jawad looked at Khalid. For the first time, some of his usual calm had faded, and he appeared slightly nervous. "It seems one of us will be the sacrifice, my friend." Khalid was taken back to the chamber of the poor along with Jawad. The iron door was locked behind them once again. His breathing remained rapid. His anxiety grew stronger with every passing moment. Whenever Jawad tried to speak to him, Khalid offered no response. His mind refused to stop racing. All he could see was the memory of the previous Zikola day, when a poor man had been slaughtered amid the celebrations of the people of Zikola. Meanwhile, Asl remained in the ruler's palace, still hoping to find Yaman, who had disappeared after his last visit to her. She knew nothing about what had happened in the Western District. She longed to learn whether Khalid had regained his freedom, or whether she would see him standing before her on the day the 3 poorest individuals were chosen. She wished she could leave the palace and travel to the Western District, but she could not abandon the ruler's wife at such a time. All she could do was wait for that day, and the one after it, to pass. Then everything would become clear. Music filled every corner of Zikola. News spread from one person to another. Everyone talked about the poor of the city, whispering that the physicians had selected 2 poor candidates from each district and were now waiting for the chief physician to deliver the final verdict. The people wanted to celebrate. They wanted to congratulate their ruler on this special day. As long as they stood far from the sacrificial platform, they were filled with joy. They worked during the day and danced through the night. They knew these festivities would soon pass and that they would return to their ordinary lives and exhausting labor, so they seized every possible moment of happiness. Even the walls of Zikola seemed dressed for a wedding. Countless colorful banners fluttered proudly above them, while blazing torches burned between them, announcing the city's celebration. Waves of citizens began making their way toward the central district to watch the Zikola competition, carrying enough food to sustain them until Zikol Day, when they would continue on to the eastern district, home to the festival grounds and the platform where the poor sacrifice would take place. As for the people of the western district, they gathered outside the palace where Khalid and Jawad were being held. Rows of soldiers lined up before the gates, signaling the departure of the 2 prisoners toward the central district and the ruler's palace. The crowd cheered and shouted with excitement when they saw Khalid and Jawad led out in chains, their hands and feet bound, with the captain of the guards marching ahead of them toward a carriage waiting outside the palace. Moments later, the carriage began to move, carrying them away from the district and toward an uncertain. The carriage rolled onward, cutting through the desert road. Inside sat Khalid, staring through the window at the vast wilderness stretching endlessly beside them. Every time Jawad tried to speak to him, Khalid remained silent, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape. At last, Jawad smiled faintly and said in a calm voice, "I know you're deeply saddened. I know you're angry with our ruler and his son. But don't lose hope, my friend. You still have 2 chances to save your life." Khalid said nothing. After a moment, Jawad spoke again. "One of us will survive, of course. Perhaps both of us will." He fell silent for a moment before continuing. "I want to ask you something." Then he added, "If you survive, and I am the one chosen for sacrifice, and when Zikola Day comes you find yourself standing among those celebrating my death, if you see a woman crying while everyone else rejoices, go to her and tell her that I never loved anyone in my life the way I loved her." Tears slipped down his cheeks. Khalid turned toward him, placed a hand on his knee, and smiled. "You'll return to her, Jawad. The 2 of you will have children, and you'll live a life that makes Zikola proud." Jawad smiled through his tears and asked, "And what about you? Don't you have a message you'd like me to carry?" Khalid was silent for a few moments. He gazed out the window once more before turning back to Jawad. "If you ever meet a young man about our age named Yamen and find him standing there in sorrow, tell him that I never found a friend or a brother like him." He paused briefly before continuing. "And if you see Zikola's physician gazing up at the sky at night, searching among the stars, tell her that she is far more beautiful than any star she seeks." Jawad looked at him immediately. "You know Zikola's physician?" "Yes," Khalid replied. A smile spread across Jawad's face. "Do you love her?" "Yes." "And does she love you?" Khalid hesitated. "I don't know." Jawad nodded thoughtfully. "If she loves you, she won't let you become Zikola's sacrifice." Khalid fell silent once again and drifted back into his thoughts, watching the road through the carriage window. The carriage continued its journey. The driver urged the horse forward, striking it lightly with his whip to make it move faster. As the sun neared the horizon, they finally arrived at the central district. Its streets were crowded with people. The carriage pressed onward through the bustling roads until it finally came to a halt before the ruler's palace. Asl was sitting in her room when her maid informed her that the poor candidates from the districts of Zikola had begun to arrive. Her heart immediately started pounding. "Have the 2 poor men from the western district arrived?" she asked at once. "Yes, my lady," the maid replied. Asl quickly asked again, "Did you see them?" "No, my lady, I didn't see them. They arrived only moments ago and are being taken to the palace hall." She then pointed toward the balcony. "I can see them from there as they pass through the courtyard on their way to the hall." Asl immediately turned toward the balcony. "No, leave me now. Come back and tell me when everyone has arrived." The maid smiled and quietly left the room. The moment the door closed, Asl hurried to the balcony and stood waiting for the poor candidates of Zikola to pass below. Her breathing grew heavier with every passing second. She feared that what she suspected might be true. "Where is Yamen?" she wondered. "Why hasn't he come to tell me what happened to Khalid?" Every time someone passed below, she leaned forward anxiously to look. Whenever she realized it was not Khalid, a wave of relief washed over her. Then suddenly her heart lurched as if it had been torn from her chest. A soldier appeared. Behind him walked Khalid. His head was lowered. His steps were slow. Another poor man was chained beside him, the 2 bound together as they struggled forward. The soldier shouted at them, "Move faster, you 2!" Asl grabbed her head and stumbled backward. One hand flew to her mouth in shock. Moments later, she stepped toward the balcony again. She watched Khalid as he moved with difficulty behind the soldier toward the palace hall. Her breathing quickened. Tears filled her eyes. "What do I do?" she whispered to herself. "What if he turns out to be the poorest of them all?" Her gaze drifted toward the scattered pages lying around her room. She read his words once more. I have never loved anyone but you. A painful thought echoed inside her mind. His fate is in my hands. She began pacing back and forth across the room. Stopping before the mirror, she stared at her reflection. What do I do? Then her eyes returned to the papers, as though they themselves were speaking to her. Khalid, what if you are the poorest among them? What would you want me to decide? She resumed pacing, again and again. She pressed her hands against her head and ran her fingers through her hair before looking out from the balcony once more. Below, more of the poor candidates were being led toward the palace hall. Then a knock sounded at her door. The maid entered and bowed. My lady, all the candidates have gathered in the palace hall. Everyone is waiting for you. Her heart trembled even more. Very well, Asel replied softly. I'll come at once. The maid left, closing the door behind her. Asel sat down on the edge of her bed and buried her head in her hands, unable to decide what she should do. A few moments later, she stood again and walked toward the balcony. This time, however, she did not look below. Instead, she lifted her eyes to the sky, now painted with the colors of sunset. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke softly. I've seen Khalid look up at the sky whenever he faced hardship. She remembered hearing him say, My lord, help me. A sob escaped her lips. I'm looking at the sky now, just as he would. Her voice trembled. My lord, help me. Please, help me. She closed her eyes and tears poured freely down her cheeks. Help me. I don't want to lose Khalid. Then she continued through her tears. And I don't want to wrong anyone. Her voice broke. I don't want to wrong anyone. The silence filled the palace hall of the ruler as if it were completely empty. Everyone stood still, each person consumed by thoughts of their fate, waiting for the physician to arrive. 10 poor individuals stood there, 7 men and 3 women, waiting for time to pass as quickly as possible. Each one wondered who would survive, and who the physician would choose for the Zikola trial. Khalid stood among them in silence, looking at them, then lifting his gaze upward as if praying to his lord. The silence was suddenly broken when Asel entered the hall wearing a loose dress, accompanied by the captain of the ruler's guards, the same man who had come to her on the night the ruler's wife gave birth. In a deep voice he said, My lady will now choose the 3 poorest among you. Asel walked forward in silence and passed in front of them. Khalid watched her, and she deliberately avoided looking at him. For a moment, she almost let her eyes drift toward him, but she quickly turned away. Then she whispered to the guard to bring the poor men to her one by one. She began examining each of them carefully, pinching a fold of skin between her fingers, asking whether they had ever been ill. If they said yes, she would question them further about the illness, examining several areas of their bodies to determine whether they were telling the truth or pretending in order to survive. Until Jawad stepped forward. She began examining him, and he subtly glanced at Khalid. Jawad smiled and said, He loves you too. Asel looked at him but said nothing, then ordered the next one forward. Then Khalid stepped toward her. Her heart beat violently. Her hand trembled as she touched his face. Khalid looked into her eyes without saying a single word. Asel whispered to herself, What should I do, Khalid, if you are the poorest? What should I do? She then signaled the guard to bring the next man. The examination of Khalid took far less time than the others, which surprised the guard, but he continued until all the poor had been examined. When she finished, Asel sat down on the luxurious chairs and took a pen and some papers, writing in silence while everyone watched her. The only sound in the hall was the sound of their anxious breathing. Then she stood up and walked among them. She stopped in front of a girl. You, return to your family. The girl cried out with joy. Asel continued moving among them, pointing one by one, sending them back to their families, until only 4 remained, including Khalid and Jawad. The tension became unbearable. Everyone waited for the final name. Asel stood before them. Khalid looked at her in anticipation. Jawad glanced at Khalid, already sensing what was coming. Two other poor men stood beside them, their faces filled with dread. Asil finally spoke. You, return to your family. She was addressing Jawad. Then she looked at Khalid and the remaining two men. You are the poorest among them. Zikola will decide which of you will be sacrificed on our day. Khalid collapsed to his knees and looked at Asil as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Asil? She left immediately and returned to her room. The moment she entered, she broke into tears again and spoke aloud to herself. I had no other choice. I cannot be unjust. I cannot. She closed her eyes and continued. You will survive Zikola, Khalid. Zikola will save you. You do not deserve to be sacrificed in our city. You will survive. You will survive. Meanwhile, Khalid was ordered by the captain of the guard to follow him, along with the others, to a neighboring palace. Jawad, still beside him, whispered, You are going to the Sculptors Palace now. Khalid looked at him without responding. Jawad continued, If the physician truly loved you, she would have saved you from this fate. The captain shouted, Move, you must leave the palace. Khalid turned to Jawad and said quietly, Return to your beloved, Jawad, and if I die, search for Yaman and tell him what I told you. Jawad smiled faintly, then turned and left. Khalid was led away, his hands and feet bound, following the captain of the guard. They left the ruler's palace and headed toward a nearby building, surrounded by a large crowd of Zikola's people who had gathered despite the night. They watched eagerly, waiting to see who would enter the trial. When they saw Khalid and the two other bound men being taken toward the Sculptor's Palace, one man shouted, He is the stranger who used to work with us cutting rocks. A woman added, I saw him before searching for the owner of a strange book. The soldiers pushed the crowd back until they reached the neighboring palace and entered. From the moment Khalid stepped inside, he understood where he was. It was the sculptor's fortress, a place where a clay statue would be made for each of the poor among them. The Sculptors Palace had a grand facade, decorated with external carvings in the form of statues of humans and animals. These figures stood out against the blazing torches that lit up the darkness of the night, giving the building a striking and almost majestic beauty. Inside, the palace was illuminated by numerous fire lamps, making it seem as if daylight had entered it. Yet the interior lacked the same beauty as the outside. It contained only a few old statues, seemingly carved for previous poor victims, along with blocks of clay scattered across the corners of the vast halls. The air was heavy with the scent of clay filling every corner. They all stopped when a short, heavy-set man with a bald head and a long beard, braided into several small plaits, called out to them. You must stay here, he said, then added, Each sculptor will soon begin making a statue of each of you. They remained where they were. After a few moments, 3 men appeared, ranging in age from young adulthood to middle age. Each one stood before one of the 3 poor men. Khalid looked at the sculptor standing before him as if he were in a deep dream. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to wake himself. The sculptor called out while holding his tools. You must not move, poor man. Do you want your statue to come out deformed? He laughed mockingly and continued, Stay still. You are in front of the fastest and most skilled sculptor in all of Zikola. I'll finish your statue in record time. Khalid looked at him, exhaled deeply, and remained silent. The sculptor began working. He brought a large block of clay and started shaping it, while occasionally glancing at Khalid. Every now and then, he would approach and place his hand on Khalid's head as if measuring proportions, then return to his work. Little by little, the statue began to take shape. The sculptors worked with remarkable speed and skill. Khalid and the others stood motionless, each waiting for his statue to be completed, hoping it would be a way out of this place. Time passed quickly. By sunrise, the sculptors had finished their work. 3 clay statues now stood before them, each resembling its owner. Khalid looked at his statue. It stood upright, but its face carried a clear expression of sorrow. He shook his head sadly, then turned to one of the men beside him. What will we do now after our statues are made? The man replied in a weak voice, We no longer have anything except the Zikola competition. Khalid asked, Will it happen now? The guard captain answered, "Why are you in such a hurry, poor man?" "The time is still early. The competition will take place in a few hours, when the sun is directly overhead. At midday," he continued. "At sunrise today, the gates of Zikola were opened. Many who had been outside and longed for the celebrations have now returned. It will take them several hours to arrive here." Khalid muttered, "The gates of Zikola were opened?" He ignored the thought and asked the captain, "What exactly will we do in this competition? My friends told me about it, but I don't remember it clearly." The captain replied, "You, poor man, Zikola will decide your fate, so you cannot say the physician chose your death. All you have to do is select 3 parts of your statue and protect them with small shields. Then the arrows of Zikola will be fired at your statue. If you are hit more than the others, you will be the sacrifice of the day." Khalid fell silent and looked up. "Lord, help me." Time passed. The sun climbed higher, approaching its zenith. Thousands of people gathered in the large square of the central district, lining up in front of a high wooden platform. They danced, sang, and chanted festive songs. Many lifted their children onto their shoulders. One man pointed and said to his child, "Look, that is Zikola." He pointed toward the platform just as a group of soldiers pulled away a large cloth covering it. Beneath it stood 2 thick wooden pillars, each about 3 meters tall, placed parallel to each other. Between them was a circular wooden disc about 1 meter in diameter, from which 3 long arrows protruded. Behind it were interlocking iron gears of varying sizes, gleaming under the sun. Beside this machine stood a large, bald man wearing only a loose pair of trousers. His powerful muscles were visible, and his massive arms controlled a large iron lever connected to one of the wooden pillars. His other hand held a shorter wooden lever attached to a strip emerging from the circular disc. The crowd erupted in cheers as drums began to beat. The ruler appeared on the balcony of his palace, accompanied by his wife holding their infant. Beside them stood Asel, silent and tense, her eyes filled with worry. They all sat and waited for the competition to begin. As the sun reaches its peak and the crowds gather around the strange machine of Zikola, the final moment before the competition hangs in the air like a held breath. Khalid stands facing a fate decided not by words, but by arrows and chance. And as the city prepares to witness the next turning point, everything is set in motion for what comes next. But the story is not over yet. To be continued in the next chapter,